Bridget Black.
Here.
Mr. Art Taylor.
Here.
Mr. Jeffrey Woodard.
Here.
Mr. Pastor Bennett is not here, and Robert is present. We will start with roll call. Nora, is there, do we have anybody or for public comment? I'm sorry, anybody for public comment?
Yes, we do have one person for public comment. It's Louis Gosselin. He will have 3 minutes, and I will keep track.
Okay, Mr. Gosselin, are you there?
You are now unmuted, Mr. Gosselin.
I think he is muted still.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we got
Yes.
you. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so my name is Louis Gosselin. I'm the elected spokesperson for the Bloomington Normal chapter of Democratic Socialists of America, and I've been a contributing organizer to Black Lives Matter Bloomington Normal since its founding in 2016. And first, I want to congratulate Reverend Dr. Bridget Black on her appointment to this board, as well as to each of you on your opportunity to lead our city to answer a question of historic proportions, which is, will we acknowledge the collective traumas and harms of policing as we know it and commit ourselves to immediate intervention and a path towards fundamental change? In other words, are we as a city committed to believing the victims of systemic racism and state violence perpetrated by the police? And are we willing to reclaim the power that we have ceded to the thin blue line so that our community is supported in implementing the changes we've been calling for? 4 years ago, well before the global uprising against police violence reached the streets of Bloomington this past summer, before the 2017 Stevenson Center report verified racial disparities in BPD enforcement, and before the creation of this board later that same year, over 400 people crammed into standing room only meeting in the basement of Mount Pisgah for a public accountability meeting with then Police Chief Brendan Hefner, organized by BLM Blono. And at that meeting, where over 400 supporters came out in support, we heard a list of reforms that BLM Blono was calling for. Those reforms are still posted online. They're still available, but they've yet to be acted upon. Since then, we've seen that the tensions that are held in our community have played out and have rolled into our streets throughout this summer, and still the fundamental changes that have been asked for are not being implemented. So first, I want to congratulate the folks who are on this board for having the opportunity to live up to this board's intention. And it was at that meeting in 2016 with Police Chief Hefner that this board was first called for, not just for handling grievances and appeals against the police, but also for the purpose of taking a proactive position on forward-thinking reforms, on actively collecting and compiling data so that you could continue the work of the Stevenson Center and track the racial disparities that play out on our streets every day, and so that you could serve as a instrument of this community in proposing policy reforms to the council. So I understand that I've got a limited amount of time, and there are so many different issues that were outlined 4 years ago and that continue to have been raised in our community. I want to encourage folks to go to tinyurl.com/BLM platform 2016 to see the original demands that our community put forward in mass. And since then, BLM Blono, along with Bloomington Normal DSA, has organized mass meetings throughout the summer where the community came together and revamped these calls for reform. Those demands can be seen at tinyurl.com/BLM platform 2020. We've organized, we've touched thousands of people, we've heard from so many people. It's no mystery or wonder the kinds of things that our community is calling for. We're calling for the power to make the kinds of reforms we need. We're calling for reallocation of funds
Those are 3
towards the
minutes.
kinds of programs that we need. So please, let's remember who is leading this call for reform, and let's bring the power back to the community instead of ceding it over and over to this thin blue line. Please be sincere in your
3
pursuit of
minutes are
reform and
up.
change.
Mr. Lewis, thank you very much for your comment. May I add, if you, item number 10 on the agenda is open to the public. So if you would like to make further comments, I would ask you to do that at that time. So thank you very much for your comment. Nora, do we have any more public comment?
We do not. However, if anyone does want to speak during that additional comment period time, they do have to register electronically, just like they would have for this initial public comment time.
Okay, thank you. So no more public comment. We'll move on to item number 4 on the agenda, and that is the motion to approve September meeting minutes. Did everybody have a chance to take a look at those minutes? And if you did, is there any additions or anything that you see that we need to add or subtract from those minutes? Hearing none. Also make note, Mr. Bennett is on his here as well. Hearing none, I'm going to call for a motion to approve. You'll have to turn your mic on and say yes or no, please. Yes, Mr. Taylor.
Mr. Chairman, I move that our minutes be accepted as printed and presented.
Okay, do we have a second?
So
Serena?
moved.
Serena was second, so moved.
I will second it.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor and Ms. Fish. So we'll now have a vote. Serena Fish, do you approve the minutes?
Yes.
Dr. Bridget Black,
Yes.
Mr. Art Taylor,
Yes.
Mr. Jeffrey Woodard,
Yes.
and Mr. William Bennett,
Yes.
and Robert, myself, yes. So motions are, or minutes are approved. So we'll go ahead and quickly move to item number 5 on the agenda, which is a motion to approve the proposed PSCRB rule changes. As during last meeting, we came to a consensus that we wanted to add some language to our board rules. I did meet with Mr. Taylor, and we did come up with some language in, let's see here. Actually, I think, Mr. Jerkins, did you have, I did see an email from you about the proposed changes, about some language. Could you elaborate on that before I move forward?
Sure. And sorry for the delay in sending that out, but it did send that this afternoon, along with, we found the amended board rules that had been approved by a resolution of the city council. And so we sent that out. That was resolution 2915, which was in April of 2019. And I think the question, and Member Taylor or others can maybe address this as well, because I wasn't a part of those meetings, but was maybe clarifying under section 2, the board recommendations. And there are provisions in the city code that created this board that allow recommendations beyond just when you're reviewing a complaint. And so we had a situation like that, within the last few months, where you reviewed a complaint, and out of that, you had a recommendation, I believe it was, involving notice when a charge is dropped. And so that type of recommendation, obviously clearly can be made. But there are other recommendations that can be made under the code from this board, and they're more under the concept of community outreach recommendations. And so the city code talks about situations where the board, when it receives, public comment, or through your public hearings, through your analyzing data, that you can also make recommendations. And the code talks about to the city manager or the police chief. And so I think there was some language, maybe wanting to expand what's currently in the rules right now under subsection B of section 2. And so I did send out, and I'm looking to see if I've got it here in front of me. I know that I think there had been some language suggested, which is fine. My only comment was, I think that language suggested it go to the city council or the mayor as well. Technically, our city code, the provisions with the PSCRB talks about it going to the city manager or police chief. So I was just a little bit more vague and said city in the language, but it's your prerogative. If you want to propose something else, that's fine too. And I will pull up that email if you need me to go over the exact language or the other language that had been proposed.
If you would, please, yeah, that would be great.
All right. So the language that that had been proposed, and again, I believe this is adding it to section 2B, where it talks about community outreach recommendations. The sentence that I was suggesting maybe be added, if you want to add something, would be to say, in addition, the board may also make recommendations to the city based on public input and the analyzation of data for changes to policy, practices, and procedures. So that would be one option. I believe the other language that was discussed was to add the sentence, in addition, the board may also make recommendations analyzing data for changes to policy, practice, and procedures to the police chief, mayor, city council, and or city manager.
Correct. Thank you. So I guess I should go back to the board. Does everybody have the board rules in front of them?
Yes.
Okay. And do you understand? So what we were trying to do is just add some language where myself and Mr. Taylor basically came to the consensus of including everybody, which would be, we can make recommendations, analyzing data, as Mr. Jerkin just read, to the police chief, the mayor, city council, and or city manager. But Mr. Jerkins is suggesting, if he may, that we just put the city and leave it vague as not actually coming down to 4 or 5 people, but just the city itself. So does everybody understand that? And is there any comments that you may have on that? Yes, Serena.
I understand why he wants to put it in, but I also, who do we report to? Who do we go directly to when we want to make a change, or we can recommend a change, or especially in our quarterly meetings, there have come up many times where stakeholders have made a recommendation and we have passed that on, and it's actually been, I don't know of any time that it hasn't been done. It's been received, but I don't want to muddy the waters as far as who gets it and make sure that it goes forward or it gets changed. And to me, when you make it a little bit too broad, I'd rather see us go to one entity or two, like the police chief and the city manager. And then if they are ready to make the change, it's put before the city council. To me, there's too many people muddying the waters instead of us being able to make the recommendations and getting them going and getting them done. Thank
Mr.
Yes.
Chairman, do you want me to answer
Yes,
that?
please, Jeff.
Yeah, so right now, their recommendations are talked about in 3 different kind of spots within the ordinance. And all of those either go to the police chief or city manager. The one about community outreach talks about going to the police department. I don't know that there was any magic when this was drafted, or how much thought was actually given into that as to, who was going to receive those recommendations. And my assumption would be, and obviously I haven't had any discussions with this, that, I think obviously they're probably open to whoever, you want to take the recommendations to. I think the city manager is probably just, kind of the funnel and the conduit for those recommendations. And maybe at the end of the day, it doesn't make a whole lot of difference who you put there. I just wanted to point out that the ordinance itself only talks about the police chief, the police department, and the city manager receiving your recommendations.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Taylor, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Jeff, for reviewing the language that we all put together. I think that our initial idea was that based off of the mayor's charge for us to make recommendations to him directly was the idea behind the language, including the mayor as well as the city council, in addition to the police chief and the city manager. I think that the proposed language that Mr. Vasquez and I put together that you reviewed was specific to that. And therefore, it being somewhat muddy or vague, if you will, for just including the city, as long as the mayor and city council are included in that definition of the city, then I wouldn't have a problem with the proposed language that you submitted. I think that based off of what I'm saying, that the board would have to more or less move forward with the understanding that the term "the city" included the mayor, the city council, the police chief, and the city manager. Without any further vagueness, if you will, that's more or less who we intended to include based off of the mayor's charge to be able to bring recommendations to him based off of public comment. And the analyzation of data, I'm happy to see that you included in your proposed language because that was specific to what Mr. Vasquez and I were particularly looking at when we put that language together. I'll just leave my statement as such and encourage the other board members to chime in and with your thoughts.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Before I move on to you, Mr. Woodard, Jeff, so is it to my understanding as well, so when you say city, it's open up to anybody that works for the city, or can you maybe define city a little bit?
Well, yeah, so city is, it is the city, but it's the city encompasses obviously the city council, the mayor, the city manager, the departments, those types of things. And if you want to be that specific, I think that's okay. The council has to approve the rule change anyway, so they would in fact, I think, be giving their blessing to it. And so it's really up to how the board wants to do that. When I think when we generically say city, that could potentially mean that you're as you talked about, that the mayor has specifically come and asked you for a recommendation on something, but that's kind of still falling within your purview of Section 81 on community outreach. And so there are provisions in the city code that kind of allow for something like that, and allow you to get that outreach and process it, analyze the data as you talked about, and then produce your outcome. And in different provisions in the city code, it says you're producing that to various people. But in reality, I mean, everybody at the city is going to get that and have that and process that. You're a public body. Your findings, your recommendations are going to be public. So I completely understand. If you want to make it more specific, again, the council is going to, have the opportunity to review this change and approve it and bless it. Everybody would be on the same page then. If you want to, so again, I don't think there's really going to be an issue either way. I just wanted to point out right now in the city code, it really focuses on the police department and the city manager.
Thank you, Mr. Jerkins. Mr. Taylor, you want to follow up with that? You're on mute. Mr. Taylor, you're on mute.
The only thing that I thought should be specified in our recommendation to the language change was that the analyzation of data was not included in board rules. So while it may be in the city code, it was not specifically in the PSCRB board rules. So I wanted to specifically add the analyzation of data to a board rule, and the best board rule was section 2, paragraph B. So again, I have no issue with the term the city, but I did want to include specifically the analyzation of data and the inclusion of languages for changes to policies, practices, and procedures.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Okay, we'll move on. I think Mr. Woodard, you were up next, please.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, first of all, I'd just like to state that I think it's important that we're having this discussion at this time because it brings up the issue of the bylaws themselves coming into this whole process. The bylaws were rather broad, and to state that in our bylaws that we can make recommendations in various areas on various issues, either stemming from a complaint or through the analyzing of data. Is that correct? Okay. So that being said, I don't think we should maybe assume that when you say the city, it's the mayor too as well, because that question comes up with me in terms of this being a broad piece that we put together in the last couple of years. And I know we're all just still learning on this. I think it warrants further discussion on the process. I mean, if we make a recommendation, whether we make it to the city manager and it goes to city council or it goes to the mayor, the bylaws themselves or board rules does not really delve into, if you will, what the process is once we've done that. Does that make sense? I mean, what is the protocol? What happens to that recommendation? And that may also kind of give us a direction as to where we want to, point the communication to. Does that make sense? Whether it be the mayor or whoever, because as far as I know, as a board, we can make this recommendation to the city, which is fine. On what is their responsibility? I guess that's what I'm asking. And that may actually help guide us in terms of what that language should or should not say.
So Jeff, would you be able to help answer his question?
I can try. So I think once you make a recommendation, and let's say it goes to the city manager, and if it's something that's within his jurisdiction, then the person that's the city manager can, decide whether or not to implement it or not, or, the police chief, that kind of a thing. If it's something that's more of requires city council action, then it's a policy level decision on their part. And so it's really, this is a recommending body. So you make the recommendation, and then either the council or the manager or the police chief will act on that. Of course, the police chief answers to the city manager, so there's obviously a connection there as well. But as far as, technically what happens in terms of, let's say you make a recommendation and it's something that goes to the city council, how does that get there? The agenda process would probably take that. And so you would submit your recommendation most likely to the city manager, who would be responsible for getting that on the agenda for the council to debate and decide upon. And we've got an internal process for handling the agenda and all those kinds of things. And it's not uncommon for something like that to maybe take 30 days or so to get onto an agenda, because there's background information that's gathered and there's a process for that. But that would essentially be the process.
Thank you, Mr. Jerkins. Mr. Woodard, did that answer your question?
Yes. Okay. Thank you. That did answer my question, but it also raises another question as to, I believe it was stated that the city manager could act on something that was within his purview. And then if not, it can go laterally. I guess maybe to actually include the language that the mayor is involved in that will give us a broader sense of communication, and maybe we'll be better off if we have that clarity or that openness, or yeah. So I agree with the language, but if you want to add, or you want to be specific to say the city and describe what that means, in legal terms, when we say the city, what do we mean? Who that body encompasses, I guess.
I guess
transparency.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, if I might,
Yes, go ahead.
one possibility would be that, as the chief administrator of the city, maybe that goes directly to the city manager, but the recommendation is copied formally to the police chief, the city council members, and the mayor. And that way everybody's getting, the recommendations. And I think that's the intent, and that's what, is going to happen. But to formally put it in there, we could say something like that as well, if that was the desire of the board.
Thank you. Serena, yes.
And that's kind of like where I want a trail. I want to be able, it went to here, what happened, and went to here, what happened. So I like the way Jeff just mentioned it, but I want to know that at the end of the day, it's Tim, the city manager, the mayor, the council. So I think with just a little bit added language and more of the actual people that supposedly we're supposed to be responding to, are the offices are mentioned, not just the city. So there's a line of being able to work out something or work through a new idea, a problem, who gets it next, who makes the final decision, that kind of thing. Thank you.
Dr. Bridget Black or Mr. William Bennett, you have any comments on the proposed changes?
Nope. Unless I'm just a little bit confused, I guess I would just pose before the board. If we're putting this in the language just for our overall scope of where we can make our recommendations to, I guess my thought process is, wouldn't it make more sense to leave open-ended on the city or the city or city officials? Because if we're saying right now, we don't necessarily know the trail of how the recommendations, once they're put forth, get done, wouldn't it make more sense to have it open-ended in our rules, so that when we actually get to the place of a recommendation, we can have the freedom to decide who we want to send it to? because our rules allow for it. So if we say we wanted to go to the city manager, the police, the mayor, we can, because we said this, if we wanted to only go to one, if we wanted to go to 5 different officials, we can choose that at the time of recommendations, rather pigeonholing ourselves to specifics. I guess I would like to know the concept of not leaving it open-ended so that we can have the freedom of decision of who we're going to allow that recommendation to go to.
Mr. Taylor.
I appreciate your comments on that, Reverend Bennett. If I might, based off of the language that Mr. Juergens put on here, I might make this recommendation to the language that we are seeking to add, because the language that's there stays with the addition of this sentence, and the change that I would make to Mr. Juergens' sentence would be, in addition, the board may make recommendations on the board may make recommendations based on public input and the analyzation of data or changes to policies, practices, procedures to the mayor, city council, police chief, and or the city manager. And that way, the language is open-ended, that we can make the recommendation to any one or all of those people. And again, I'll listen. That's my proposal. And when we've had a discussion about that change, I would ask that we move the question forward. But that would be my recommendation.
Ms. Fish, go ahead.
I'd like to second Mr. Taylor's proposed addition in the language he used. And so I'm moving that we accept the changes and do the statement as presented by Mr. Taylor.
Any other comment?
Just a quick question. Is there any other city officials outside of the ones that Mr. Taylor named that could at some point we could go to if we wanted to receive a recommendation? So is there any other city officials that may take that could possibly warrant receiving a recommendation for us besides the one that Mr. Taylor named?
Jeff, could you help answer that question, please?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure, but I would say this, that anybody else would be under the jurisdiction of one of those parties. So, you know, for example, let's say you needed to send a recommendation to the legal department, you could get it to the city manager who, you know, can, you know, tell me what to do, so to speak. So I think that you're covered by what Mr. Taylor has proposed.
Got it.
Any other comments on that? And if there's not, yes, Dr. Black.
Make the recommendation, and any one of those 3 or 4 people that we said, the mayor, the police chief, the manager, and the city council, they're the ones that can implement our recommendation? And are they the only ones that can implement our recommendation?
Yes.
Then that's all we need, is whoever can implement. That's whose name need to be on there.
Mr. Taylor?
And I would second Serena's original motion that we include the language. In addition, the board may make recommendations based on public input and analyzation of data for changes to policies, practices, and procedures to the mayor, the city council, the police chief, and or the city manager.
So just to be clear, read that one more time, Mr. Taylor, just so everybody's clear.
Okay, I'm proposing that we make changes to the language in, why don't I include, and with Serena's affirmation, a change to the motion, or if she would withdraw her motion and allow me to make a motion.
Serena, did you hear Mr. Taylor's recommendation?
What he said. So this last statement that he said, that's what I'm agreeing and moving forward and saying yes to.
Okay. Then I would like to make a friendly amendment then to the language. And that would be.
Hold on, Mr. Taylor. Yes,
okay,
Nora.
I'm sorry.
When you're making your motion, can you state the full and complete motion that you're making for the record, please? So I can record it.
Serena.
Or Art, Art can make the motion as long as someone makes the full motion, whatever language you want to bring forward in totality.
Okay,
right.
so
into Art's motion.
So, Mr.
Okay.
Taylor, go ahead and go read make your motion and read as proposed.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I
Could
make a
you
motion.
read the whole
Yeah.
sentence? Could you
That's
read
what
the whole sentence?
That's
Thank
what I'm going to do. Okay. So, Mr. Chairman, I propose the following motion. I propose changes to Section 2, Paragraph B, to include, in addition to the cases in it reviews, the board may make recommendations to the police chief and/or city manager based on the board's community outreach efforts and its ongoing dialogue with city residents. In addition, the board may also make recommendations based on public comment, based on public input and the analyzation of data for changes to policies, practices, and procedures to the mayor, the city council, the police chief, and/or the city manager. That is my motion.
Okay, is that okay, Nora? Did you get that? Okay. Serena, go ahead.
Now, can I second it?
Any other comments before? Nope, you can second. Go ahead, Serena.
I second the motion presented by Mr. Taylor.
Got it. Thank you. So I guess my next question would be, we have to vote, correct? Okay. So now I will roll call to approve the changes Mr. Taylor just read. Ms. Fish,
Yes.
Dr. Black,
Yes.
Mr. Taylor,
Yes.
Mr. Woodard,
Yes.
and Mr. Bennett.
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. So that is passed. My question would be, Nora, so do I submit that to city council or city manager to be on the next city council agenda?
I'd defer to Jeff on that. Jeff, what do you think the process would be?
Yeah, so it's too late to get on the agenda for Monday, the 12th, I believe it is. But I can put together a council memo, talk to the city manager. He knows that this is coming, but I'll go ahead and do all the work and work with him to get this on a future agenda, and we'll shoot for that last meeting in October.
Perfect. Thank you, Jeff. I would just ask that if you can CC me on that as well, that way in case if I have to, I'm sure I have to attend or whatever that's needed from the PSCRB, I'll be happy to take care of that.
Absolutely not a problem.
Thank you. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Mr. Taylor.
Thank you, Chairman. It was your call that allowed us to get together to put language together. And thank you, Mr. Jurgen, for your assistance with that.
Perfect. Okay, so that being done, let's move on to item number 6, which is an update on the board vacancy. And I will ask Nora, have you heard anything from Mayor Renner about filling the last vacancy on our board?
I know he has reviewed those applications that are on file right now, and I think he plans to follow up with you, Chairman Vasquez, in the very near future.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, this is something that we want to make sure we get filled, and so we're just wanting to follow up on that. Thank you, Nora, for that. So now we'll move on to item number 7, which is the discussion of complaints received from Mr. Assistant Chief Walmsley. Could you update us on that, please?
Yes, sir. Make sure I was unmuted there. As of today's date, we've received 17 complaints, sworn citizen complaints. I believe that's 3 or 4 more than last month. I don't remember. I think we were at 13, if I'm not mistaken, last month. Of the 17, we have 5 that are still pending. I will mention, of the 4 that we have received, 3 of them complaints are face mask complaints, just so everybody is kind of aware. As well as, I thought I would throw this in there just so everybody is kind of aware where we're at year to date and everything. The 17 complaints, that's in lieu or in reference to, as of yesterday, roughly 44,996 calls for service. So I'll give you a quick little breakdown in regards to the complaints that we've received. We have 3 for excessive force, 1 for dissatisfied with service, 2 for unlawful search and seizure, 1 for courtesy to public, 2 for theft, 6 for violation of policy, rules, and regs. That's where the face mask ones go in. 4 for harassment, 2 for unlawful arrest, and 1 complaint is still kind of unknown. So that is where we sit.
Thank you. Yeah, Mrs. Fish. Oh. Thank you. Ms. Fish, go ahead. You had a comment.
At our last meeting, the mask thing came up again, and I thought there was some kind of resolution that had been changed, or there was a change in the department about masks. Am I wrong? Or I thought Mr. Walmsley had talked about that.
I don't recall anything about the masks. I know there is a directive out from Interim Chief Scott right now, as well as the city manager, that our officers are to be wearing masks anytime we deal with public. So I think that's where some of these came in. Some of these are prior to that order coming out from the chief. I think there was some confusion on the part of some of our officers on, okay, what constitute being out in public versus like a traffic stop. Is that in public, or is that within 6 feet for longer than 10 minutes? So there's a lot of confusion with that. So we've tried to clear that up.
So that's what I thought, that it is now mandatory that they have to wear a mask.
Correct.
Certainly, and I think you were referring to the human relations meeting they had at the BCPA. I believe that's where Chief Scott talked about that, because I remember that as well.
Right, you're right. So we knew about it before anybody else. So there you go.
Perfect.
Let's see who was next. Mr. Taylor?
No, I withdraw my question.
Okay. Did anybody else have any questions or comments for Assistant Chief Walmsley on the police complaints? No, Mr. Assistant Chief Walmsley, I did have a comment. I guess my comment would be, so along with complaints that are received, is there, how should I word it? So is there any training involved when a complaint comes in and say you guys talk about it. You sit down and talk about the complaint. Is there any training that comes out of a complaint that is passed to other officers? Does that question make sense?
Yes and no. Anytime there is a sustained complaint, there is a definite sit down with the officer in regards to what was sustained, if there's discipline attached to it or not. Every officer is notified of the complaint that comes in. So there's a conversation that takes place either via an interview with the internal affairs officer or sergeant, or with myself when the letter that closes the complaint out is sent out. So I don't know if that answers or.
Yeah, it does answer. However, so for example, if you get a call from a citizen and they just have a general question about either a traffic stop or an encounter with a police officer, and during that discussion, the Bloomington Police realizes, hey, you know what? You have a valid point. However, let's just use this as training. And instead of somebody filing a complaint and going through the process, you come to them and say, hey, you know what? We understand your complaint. However, it doesn't move to the point where there's a policy needs to be changed. However, we can learn from this complaint and maybe just use it as an example to other police officers, like, hey, if this happens, this is maybe something that we can learn from. Do you understand that?
Absolutely. And that is something that happens quite regularly. Somebody will call in and have, I would say, a minor complaint, kind of classify that as, and that's something that the supervisor will entertain, and it's the supervisor who will then sit down with the officer and explain, okay, this is the issue that was called in. Yes, I think you may have been wrong on that. It doesn't rise. They don't want to file a formal complaint. They just want to make sure it's taken care of, and you have that training. That happens, regularly.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, and that was my question. It was just, sometimes it doesn't come to a level of a complaint, but it's, the police department can use it as training for future interactions with the public. So thank you very much with that. Any other questions or comments for Assistant Chief Walmsley on complaints received? Mr. Taylor.
Chief Walmsley, thanks for the report. Do any of the more recent complaints that have been received, to your understanding or knowledge, would they rise to the level of a complaint that would be reviewed by the PSCRB that you would want to forewarn us about ahead of time?
I have not heard of anybody mentioning that at all.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Assistant Chief Walmsley. Hearing no other comments, we'll move on to item number 8 on the agenda, and that's just general updates from Bloomington Police Department.
Okay, I'll try and be quick here. Just so everybody is aware, we had 4 officers graduate from the academy on Saturday. They are now part of our field training process at the department. We have 2 more that are in the academy. They are, I think they're in week number 3, if I'm not mistaken. They'll graduate just before Christmas. So at this point, we're roughly 2 officers down. I've got quite a few out on injury. And I know of several that upcoming retirements that'll be coming. So we're going to be beginning of the year going through another hiring spell, I believe. In regards to that, the other thing would be in the quarterly meeting, I wanted to just brief you on a couple of awards that have come in this last quarter. First one has to do with Officer Freshour and Officer Clark. It's a life-saving award. These 2 officers, I'm just going to paraphrase real quickly for you. These 2 officers were sent on a unresponsive subject who they believed was having a heart attack. Officer Freshour and Officer Clark arrived on scene, immediately began CPR measures. while directing the other occupant of the house to kind of guide the fire department in there, because we were there much quicker than the fire department. They continued CPR for over 3 minutes. By the time the fire department arrived, they had restored the pulse of the gentleman, thus saving his life. So they were awarded the life-saving award. The other award happens to be for Officer Jones and Officer Karstens. We had a suicidal subject that had called in, and his comment on the phone was, "Come get me, I'm going to hurt myself." These officers arrive on scene. The subject has a handgun placed up against his head. They talk to the subject for a decent amount of time, ultimately get the subject to place the gun on his lap. As they continued to talk, they were able to kind of direct his attention to one of the officers. The other officer was able to jump in there and grab the gun out of his hand and toss it out and get the guy to the help that he needed. These two officers were awarded the bravery commendation. Along with that, this last quarter, we've also put out 9 other letters of commendations and or attaboys. So I just wanted to kind of update you on that.
Thank you very much. I think it's very important. It's vital that we also hear the good things that our police department is doing. So thank you very much for sharing that. Nora, if I may, before we go to the quarterly meeting or to item number 9, can I give out some thank yous? I wanted to thank Phil, the IT, first of all, before we go into our quarterly meeting. He's awesome. Working through this virtual Zoom, he's been nothing but very helpful. So thank you, Phil, first of all. And I also want to thank Nora and the whole board, Chad, Assistant Chief Walmsley, for doing this virtual thing is a challenge for everybody. And I think I want to commend everybody for sticking with us and getting through this. And hopefully soon we'll be able to meet in person. But thank you again, Phil and Nora, for helping us through this. Yes, Mr. Woody.
This is for Chief Walmsley. Is there any further updates on the wellness program?
I'm glad you asked. Yes, we are getting ready to do, will be our 4th class in about a week and a half. We're trying something a little different this next class. We're going to have just our brand new officers in it. So it's going to be just anybody that has, probably a year and a half or less. So it's going to be a different dynamic. So it'll be interesting to see what their response is. But the last class we had, which was about a month ago, still overwhelming support for it. The guys are really impressed by it. And I think it's still going to be a good thing.
Thank you.
Dr. Black, go ahead.
Question, Chief Walmsley, do you all have a chaplain?
We don't have a chaplain so-called assigned. We used to have a chaplain's program. I think it's still in existence, but I don't know if there's anybody that is still in that. We do have what's called our peer support group that I know they have connected with some chaplains. I don't know off the top of my head who that is, but I could definitely find out.
I just think it's important that you have someone to talk to.
I agree.
You're on a lot of trauma and drama. You just need to talk to somebody about all that trauma and drama.
I agree with you.
Mr. Walmsley, one more on the wellness. And so if I may, how is the Bloomington Police Force doing as far as, is there been an outbreak of COVID or anything that you see will be a shorthanded in police officers?
Knock on wood right now, we've had 2 officers that have tested positive this whole time. So we have been very, very blessed, very lucky. Hopefully that stays with us going forward. We've had some close calls, don't get me wrong, but only 2 positive.
Good, that's good to hear. Thank you very much for that. Anything else from the general updates from the Bloomington Police Department, or any other comments? Mr. Taylor, go ahead.
Thank you. And I want to thank Chief Walmsley for the report. Since the establishment of the PSCRB, you've been very helpful with keeping us abreast of what's going on. We appreciate the reports, and we appreciate your personal dedication to making sure that we stay informed for the business at hand. It's not easy, and I know that the transparency is something that we appreciate, and something that that I'm sure that other board members feel as well. The number of complaints is appreciated, and when we ask for that information, your demeanor on it and information that you share with us is very important. So I wanted to thank you for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor, for that. So we will move on to item number 9 on the agenda, and that is the discussion of the marijuana legalization rules. Assistant Chief Walmsley, Officer McCoy, were you going to handle that for us today?
Yes, I am. And thanks for having me. What I'm going to do is show you a slideshow that we put out to all officers back in December of 2019, before the law came into effect, and are directed to our officers, where this is very much like alcohol. And as we go through it, you'll see there's a lot of similarities. Cutoffs are the age of 21. You can't have it open in the compartment of a car. I think a lot of the public thought that if I had weed on December 31st, on January 1st, it automatically became legal. And it's not that easy. It has to come, just like alcohol, it has to come from a manufacturer to where it's protected and grown under certain circumstances and safe is the overall thing. So I'll go ahead and start the slideshow, and at the end, hopefully be able to answer any questions you have. No, I just lost it. Hmm?
It's up on mine. You see it.
You see it? Okay. So the new law states that you can have up to 30 grams of marijuana without a medical permit, where before, I believe it was from 2017 or 2018, the only people who could legally possess marijuana was with a medical marijuana card. Now it is, as long as you're over the age of 21 and you buy it from a dispensary, you can have up to 30 grams of marijuana. As you see in the parentheses, there's two standards. There's that standard for those who are residents, and there's that standard for those who are not residents. Also included in the possession of cannabis are the edibles and concentrates. And as you see from the chart, there are various concentrates that you can buy at these dispensaries. I'm not ashamed to admit that some of these concentrates, I have no idea what you do with them. There's very few of those that are listed on the screen that I've seen in my 26 years here. You also have edibles. Now the edibles is up to 500 milligrams per dose, or 250 for non-residents. And your edibles are widely purchased at your dispensaries, and a whole nother thing that, again, we haven't seen before because it hasn't been in our area. Okay, as far as home growing, you still need a medical marijuana card to grow marijuana for a medical purpose, and it's only up to 5 plants. So anybody growing up to 5 plants without a medical marijuana card would be in violation of the law and subject to a fine. And then over 5 plants would be subject to the law also, and that's even with a medical marijuana card. Cultivation dispensaries in Illinois, and this is, understand this is the facts from December of 2019. There were 21 existing licensed medical marijuana dispensary or cultivation facilities. The medical marijuana dispensaries were the only legal sellers of marijuana. And at that time, there were 56 dispensaries. In 2020, craft growers would be able to apply for a license to establish a 5,000 square foot facility. By mid-2020, and this was the estimate, that they would have 300 stores or dispensaries in operation by 2022. And that because of the licensing process, and now I don't know if they're on track for this, because I saw an article recently that there were people that were contesting the licensing process. Local governments will have the power to decide who gets licensed and where. That would be for the city government to answer better than me. Nothing really comes across our desk as far as approval or denial as far, when it comes to dispensaries. There are 45 dispensaries have been approved for opening since January of 2010, 9 more cultivation since 2010, and craft growers anticipate 120 stores within the 18 months. Medical marijuana is taxed at one rate, and the cannabis for recreational use will be taxed by the level of THC that it has. So the most potent, if you think of alcohol, if it's a certain proof, you'd pay this much tax. If it's a higher proof, you'd pay a higher tax. And there's no tracking system in place that if you got your 500 milligrams of edibles or your 30 grams of cannabis in Bloomington, that you couldn't drive over to Champaign and get 30 more grams, or Peoria and get 30 more grams. Okay, the prohibitions. It can be legally smoked in a person's home, including your yard, or at a dispensary, very similar to alcohol. You can't open up your beer if you're at a convenience store because they don't have a consumption permit. So the dispensaries will be very similar to that if they have a consumption on site. Not in any public locations. So just like alcohol, you can't bring it on the street, in the parks. You can't have it in the motor vehicle, on school grounds. And the only difference between this and alcohol is you cannot do it around anybody 21. You can't do it near an on-duty school bus driver, near police, fire, or corrections. Individual businesses have the right to refuse, or the right to ban it from their employees, such as the police department. Landlords can ban it from smoking on their premise. It's a violation of their lease. It's not a criminal act. So if they sign a lease and in the lease it says, I prohibit cannabis consumption on the premises, and somebody does it, they could violate their lease. Different than alcohol, there is no social host protections, where if a parent wants to allow their child to consume alcohol on their property under their guise, then there's no crime. But if you do it with cannabis, as you see, there's a $500 fine. If somebody gets hurt because of it, it's a class 4 felony. Mobile conveyance, the vehicles. Recreational position of a vehicle on a public way, unless the cannabis is reasonably secure. So again, like alcohol, if you go over to a friend's house, you open up a bottle of wine, you don't finish it, you recork it, and you put it in the trunk, it's not accessible to the driver. The cannabis can't be accessible to the driver. You can't use it in the passenger compartment, and then it has to, different is cannabis has to be in an odor-proof, child-resistant container. In this, I would very much say it's got to be very similar to when you get prescription medication. You can't just dump it out into a bag, put it in your pocket, and carry it on the street. You have to keep it in the original container so they know exactly what it is and where you got it. That's the best protection that people can have. Here's an example of some of the containers. Now, part of this law was they introduced criminal justice reforms because there were a lot of people who were tried and convicted of small amounts of cannabis, and they wanted to give them the chance to turn it around. So anybody with possession up to 30 grams will be expunged, and there's a set scale or a set timeline when those expungements will take effect, depending on when your charges and trial happened. Charges and conviction of 30 to 500, they can petition the courts to lift the charges. Under 30 grams, it'll automatically be expunged. The criminal justice agencies are responsible for that. Estimate is this will affect 770 residents of Illinois alone, with the marijuana convictions being expunged. The reforms, the schedule is if you had an arrest since 2013, they will be expunged by January 2021. Arrests from 2000 to 2013, they will be expunged by 2023. And arrests prior to 2000 will be expunged by 2025. And as you saw, 770,000 people, that's a lot of work to put on a still functioning criminal justice agency to say, okay, you'll have this all done by next January. So they're trying to be reasonable about it and come up with this timeline. Ordinance violations for over 10 grams can remain since they are only a civil violation. Driving under the influence didn't have any changes. There was always a 5 nanograms or more per milliliter of blood is how you show that you were driving under the influence of cannabis. There will be probably new legislation coming out in reference to the field sobriety tests as that becomes researched more. There's no smoking in residence halls, and currently applicable laws related to people under the age of 21 are in place. Now, in reference to people in college, another thing comes up. Here's the list of the crimes. Prior to January 1, your Class A, or your charges were 2.5 to 10, 10 to 30, 30 to 500, or under 2.5. As you see, nothing even starts with a civil fine until you have 10 grams. And now it's a Class B instead of a Class A from 10 to 30. And it kind of bumped everything back. In reference to students who are receiving aid, if you have a conviction for possession, it can affect your loans and grants for 1 year after the first conviction for possession, 2 years for the second conviction, and indefinite for a time after a third conviction. And that's for felony or misdemeanor drug possession. Now, if you're convicted of selling, it can do the same thing, and loans for grants for 2 years on the first conviction and indefinite on the second conviction. That is it in a nutshell, just a quick overview. If there's any questions, I'll try and answer them.
I'll go first. I did have a question. So if their conviction gets expunged, does that include, say they were under the influence of marijuana and they committed a crime? How does that work? Does that marijuana charge get expunged as well, and the violent crime, or how does that work?
The expungement is for the marijuana itself, unless it's tied to other crimes. So if you have a simple possession, but then you also have a conviction for dealing, that might not get expunged. Okay, but 9 times out of 10, if it's just for the cannabis and it's under that 30 grams, it's 30 grams, it'll be taken care of through that that chart of by 2021, 2023, and 2025.
Okay, thank you. Was there any other questions? Mr. Woodard, go ahead.
Just a comment. First of all, Tim, I want to thank you for the presentation. I probably could ask the question here, how many people knew 50% of that information in this meeting today? And we're 8 months into this legalization. My original idea when I came up with the a presence or a presentation or training on the laws, my idea was that we would have this for the public. And I don't know that I necessarily feel like it is the law enforcement's responsibility. I mean, it could be our stakeholders, but you know, education is the key. The more people that know what you just presented to us today, is the less people you're going to have to deal with. The less people you have to deal with, is the less possibility that something is going to go wrong.
Ms. Warder, what I'll comment to is that this is very similar to when we went with concealed carry. Those people who abided by the law and owned a firearm properly continued to own a firearm properly. Those people who want to buy their cannabis properly through a dispensary, we're never going to see them. And really in 8 months, I don't think we've really dealt with anybody who's bought their cannabis from a dispensary. To show you law enforcement's dealing with this, I don't ever remember seeing a report from January 1 to now that anybody had any of these edibles or a container in a car or anything. So not saying it didn't happen, but it's not happening in a frequency that everybody thought it might.
That's good to hear.
Mr. Bennett, go ahead.
Thank you for the report, Tim. I'm not too sure I want my church listening to this presentation. Have to have some discussions there. Hey, just a quick question. Could you explain why, unless I just understood it wrong, the expungement records seem to move faster for someone who received that crime in a lesser time? Because I believe, like you stated, if it was after 2013, then they would be expunged by 2021. But if it was before that, it'd be later. Could you explain that, why it seems to go in that order as opposed to the ones who have had something on their record much longer not to be expunged first?
Pastor Bennett, my guess, and only my guess, is that because this is, they are probably looking at that as had the least impact if it was farther out. So take care of what happened most recently so they can get back on track.
Okay, thank you.
Serena, go ahead.
Yeah, I had the same question as Mr. Bennett, and I agree with Reverend. I think the older ones, because they're the ones that possibly couldn't get a job, couldn't get their life back on track. And we seem to be, I'd like to see the older ones, if it's all possible, that they get a chance first to start over versus some of the younger ones who have a lot more information to deal with it anymore, or have been given a lot more information about what the consequences are. And so my thing was the same thing as Mr. Bennett. I don't understand why maybe the older ones weren't expunged first. Thank you.
I wish I had an answer for you, but as most things that come through the legislator, I can't. I'm just left to deal with either enforcing them or trying to answer questions and help the public understand as best I can.
Is there any other comments or questions for Assistant Chief McCoy? Hearing none, thank you, Assistant Chief McCoy, for that presentation. We greatly appreciate that and for your time. Thank you. We will now move on to item number 10, which is open to the public discussion on topics. Nora, do we have anybody who would like to make some comments?
So you don't have anyone who is registered individually for this portion of the meeting. However, you do still have the individual who made public comment at the beginning of the meeting as an attendee. So if you would like me to, I can unmute him if you would like to see if he'd like to participate in this portion of the meeting.
Yes, please, if possible.
Yes, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yes, Louis, you're on.
Yeah, so I was just curious kind of what the format is for this portion of the agenda. And I did sign up afterwards, but I wasn't clear on how the public should sign up if there was the option to do both or how it should look. So I'm kind of curious what sort of what the format is or how we should be kind of dialoguing in this portion of the agenda.
Nora, is there a specific way that they should sign up for future public meetings if we still do them virtually?
So it is part of that virtual form. You can sign up for any or all portion. So we'll try to make that more clear on the form going forward.
Well, one thing that I'm interested in, and I'm not sure if this is an appropriate thing to raise, you know, in recent weeks, I've seen some letters to the editor and some different things that have been kind of put out there about comments that were made during one of these board meetings regarding Black Lives Matter or regarding a concern about a potential appointment and their feelings on Black Lives Matter, Bloomington Normal. But I guess more to the point, I'm interested in what this board's willingness would be to work with Black Lives Matter, Bloomington Normal in generating more public participation for this kind of input, because I think it's a great idea. And I think that the spirit of what this board is set out to do is great. I mean, it's something that I volunteered in trying to push our community to adopt. But I'm hopeful that the kind of success that BLM Blono has had over the summer in mobilizing hundreds of people to have the kind of conversation that we're set out to have tonight, like I'm hopeful that perhaps there's an openness with this board to work directly with those organizers to make these kinds of conversations a little more engaging of the larger public. So I'm curious from members of this board, like, would there be an interest in working with BLM Blono as organizers and in moving this conversation? And then secondly, what has been the board's position on the reforms proposed by BLM Blono? And has there been any careful discussion among members about suggesting those for adoption by the council generally?
I will answer my personal opinion, and then I'll open it up to the board as well. Question number one is, are we willing to work with any organizations, including Black Lives Matter? We're willing to work with everybody. We are the bridge, if you may, between citizens of Bloomington and the police department. I feel like we have never turned anybody away as far as wanting to have an open conversation. We'd be willing to invite. As a matter of fact, we do invite all organizations and people who are involved in getting our board organized to attend any board meeting and quarterly meeting. Now, I understand it's been a little bit of a challenge with these virtual meetings. And I do understand it's a challenge, you know, trying to work through the hoops of how to get on and how to make public comment. However, we are open to talk with anybody, any ideas. So that hopefully answers your first question. As far as your second question, we had to go through some, as far as police reform, we had to make some changes to our board rules, first of all, to even start to get into the police reform talks. We want to make sure we have, I don't want to say the power, but we have the recommendation power, I would say, to make any suggestions that we hear from the public as far as police policies or any of that form. So that'd be a little premature to talk about that until we get our board rules in order. That would be my answer to both questions. Anybody else on the board want to reply to Mr. Guzlin? Yes, Mr. Taylor.
Thank you. Mr. Gosselin, thank you for your comment, and I'll echo what Chairman Vasquez just mentioned. We specifically appreciate Black Lives Matter as well as other of our what we call our stakeholders who helped with the establishment of the PSCRB. Black Lives Matter and the League of Women Voters and Not in Our Town and ACLU and YWCA and lots of others organizations were instrumental in helping to create and extend and badger and more or less get the PSCRB established as a review board for police activity, and as Chairman Vasquez mentioned, and as you've heard through our dialogue around the amendment to the board rule, that we wanted to be sure that we were on firm footing with recommendations that we would make as a result of both data and the dialogue that we have with community members for recommendations that we would make on police reform and other matters as well. We are committed to those conversations and to being that conduit between the police, the city council, and the general public with reference to dialogue about about police reform. We have no intention of limiting our role, as well as opening the floor to any recommendation that the public may wish to make that we can be party to make happen within the city of Bloomington. Of course, we can't speak for other communities. We can only speak for Bloomington. And being that we are the board that's established to help with those dialogues, as well as other stakeholders who also are in the midst of having those dialogues. We are happy to partner with anyone who's about the business of having dialogue with reference to the police. We also include the police in our dialogues because we don't think that we should silo those conversations with reference to reforms without them being involved in the dialogue. And while that may be a problem for some organizations, we're committed to being open and transparent, and that would be inclusive of the police in our conversations. So we don't exclude them from conversations, nor do we let them dominate our discussions or overly try to overly influence dialogue or recommendations that we may make. So I appreciate your being present, and that we look forward to continuing the dialogue.
Does anybody else on the board want to? Yes, Dr. Black, go ahead.
With that said, I think that we should probably take a look at whatever it is that they have that they want us to look at. Let's look at it. Send it to us and to Nora, and she'll get it out to all of us, and let's take a look at it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Before I let you respond, Mr. Gosselin, Mr. Bennett, did you or Mr. Woodard, do you guys have any comments or for Mr. Gosselin?
Yeah, I would just add to the discussion, as I'm sure Mr. Gosselin is well aware, with the forming of the PSCRB, there was a new avenue for transparency, and on a regular basis from the department, we do get data. We do get data that we were not privileged to as a public prior to the forming of this board. And that data is also, of course, is available to the public. And that being said, when we talked about our recommendations in terms of complaints, we look at analyzing data. And that is going to be a driving force for us. And that being said, to maybe bridge to what Reverend Black was saying, if you have, as an organization or as one of our stakeholders, additional data or additional information as to what the climate is or what the issues are, this is the obviously the forum where you can share that.
Yeah, and I would just add on, obviously, Black Lives Matter was one of the organizations essential to establishing this board. So we definitely, as our chairman has said, open to connecting with you guys and your ideas as we move forward to make our different recommendations and presentations. I would also say to be encouraged to continue to do the work that you guys are doing, but also getting the word out about our quarterly meeting so that more, as our chairman stated, is kind of maybe a little difficult with the virtual things, but even when we come out of this and are able to start meeting back in person we want more community involvement. I think that's one thing that the board has always discussed in our own private meetings, is how when we have our quarterly meetings with the public, we really truly do want the public to be there, our community to be there, and we want to hear the voices of our community. I think that just makes us a stronger board. So again, we appreciate you being here and everything that you have stated on tonight.
Mr. Gooslin, hopefully that kind of answered maybe some of your questions. Any feedback?
Sure. Yeah. So first I want to just thank you for the opportunity to even have this dialogue and just, let you all know I really support the spirit and the sentiment of the work that is set out to be done with the PSCRB. I'm also encouraged with what the focus that you're centering in on this evening around trying to get firm footing around policy recommendations. I think that early on, that's really what folks were campaigning for, and it's something that made its way even to the city's website, as it describes this board as one that offers differing perspectives on policy and law enforcement. There are a number of resources that I would love to be in touch with each of you about, and early on we had reached out with the contact with an organization called NACOL. That's the National Association for Civilian Oversight and Law Enforcement, who at the time had offered their assistance in helping set up kind of the parameters to give that firm footing on policy. So that's one of many resources that I'm sure we would love to connect you with. And additionally, like as an organizer, I would be interested, and I'm sure a lot of the civil rights organizations that were involved in pushing for the PSCRB would be interested to know like how you would like to see the community show up to help further your work. And so, I think it's kind of a two-way thing. I feel like, at least speaking for Bloomington Normal DSA, as well as, the work that BLM Blono is doing, I think that exchange can go both ways, and we can do more to get our community in on this conversation, especially given the summer we just had. Lastly, if I can throw another one in as it relates to law enforcement, we've seen a resurgence in the community call for a welcoming cities ordinance that would enable the residents in our community who may have undocumented citizenship status or just may fear the kinds of horror stories that we've heard come out of ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, in national headlines. And I would like to know if the issue of welcoming cities is something that this body has taken up, and if not, if it's something that this board is willing to make a priority and a recommendation on as you pursue the intent of providing different perspectives in law enforcement practices.
So yes, on the welcoming city, so that was brought to us, I believe, 2 years ago. At that time, we were just still getting our feet wet. We had still working on board rules as that takes some time. And at that point, we decided that was something that we did not fall under our purview. However, that's not to say that we can revisit that and get the board's view on that to see if that's, something that the board would be willing to take on as well. So, I'm not saying no. That is something that we'll have to discuss within the board and to see what their feelings are or what their opinions are now that once we get these board rules changed as far as recommendations, how that's going to open it up a little bit. If I may ask the board currently, what is your opinion of Mr. Guslin's suggestion that we take on the Welcoming City? Ms. Fish, go ahead.
I believe that when this was brought up before, part of the decision for us first of all, it was not in our wheelhouse. We had no anything to do with it at the point. It was discussed at some of our quarterly meetings, but I think it's also, if I remember correctly, the mayor had something to do with removing it from our parameter, what we were working on, one, to get going on the PFCRB for what it originally was set up for. Doesn't mean it can't be revisited, but there were some reasons why it was not put under the wheelhouse of PFCRB. And maybe we need to go back and recheck some of the meeting minutes and some of the conversations that went on, including with the mayor. Thank you.
Mr. Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I recall, that entire conversation around the Welcoming Cities ordinance, and at the time that it was presented to the PSCRB, was during a time, as you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, that we were in the midst of defining our own role with reference to our activity around police complaints. At the time, if I recall correctly, because we viewed our role as limited to police complaints, and that the Welcoming City ordinance had more to do with other matters that did not touch on police complaints. We felt as a board that it was not within our wheelhouse. And I'm specifically remembering the language that we used and the conversations that we had with reference to what we thought was within our purview and what we thought was not. And at that time, when there was conversation around holding dialogue around the Welcoming City ordinance, we declined because it did not specifically concern itself with police complaints. Again, as the chairman mentioned, that now that we have changed our board rules to include recommendations for policies, practices, and procedures within the Bloomington Police Department, then that might be something that could be revisited at some point in time. I'm not really sure. Again, if to me, there's still a question as to whether or not is within our purview, but it's a conversation that could still be had with the board rules revised as we have just done today. So that's my thought.
Mr. Woodard, did you have something?
Well, I'll just say it is true that when it came to us, I don't know that it was a formal recommendation, and there was a little noise, Mr. Gooseland, behind that because it was incorrectly stated that the PSCRB mandate was to move that agenda forward, and it even got some press. I don't know if you remember that. But again, at that time, we didn't have any power, if you will, to address that, and it was not really formally brought to us. But that being said, with the opening up the rules and the change in the bylaws, I'll say anything is possible.
Dr. Black, did you have anything to add? Okay. Louis, does that answer your question?
I believe so. I'll just say that I'm really encouraged that this board is seeking to find its power in being able to move proactive solutions that the community is calling for. And I think that, if folks didn't hear us before, surely after the summer, it's known that there is a strong desire to see some fundamental change in the way that policing happens in our community. And there are a number of organizations that you as a board can reach out to fully engage the public. So like I said, it's a two-way thing, and I look forward to continuing to see this board find its power and move forward solutions. And I think Welcoming Cities is 100% absolutely within the purview of a public safety and community relations board. And so I appreciate the opportunity to have this exchange with you and hope that we can get more people in on this conversation.
Louis, thank you very much for your comments. And as always, we're open to anything. We look forward to working together with any of these groups that are interested in anything to do with not only the city of Bloomington, but with the police department and any other departments, if we may, now that we've kind of opened up the rules a little bit. So thank you very much for your comments. And is there anything else you would like to add to the conversation today?
Unless the board is willing to make a commitment that they, at least as individuals, would support taking on Welcoming Cities, I don't know that there's much more to talk about.
Okay, we will have that discussion within our board, and hopefully at the next quarterly meeting, that can be something that can be a talking point, and hopefully by that time, again, our board rules have been approved by City Council, and we'll move from there.
Thank you.
Yeah, before you go, Mr. Gooseland, and the board, I just wanted to remind that Reverend Black mentioned earlier that we welcome any information that you have. I know earlier you said you had something that you wanted to share with us. So short of us making any individual commitments to this Welcoming City today, don't let that be a deterrent for you to share that information that you mentioned earlier.
I appreciate that. Thanks.
You're welcome.
You're welcome. Mr. Gooseland, again, thank you for your comments. And Nora, was there anybody else on the online or want to make any comments?
No, you have no other attendees at this time.
Okay. Yes, Jeff.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to clarify that the change in the board rules isn't necessarily expanding the scope of the authority of the commission. I think that what's in the city code is already allowing you to look at and work with these different community groups and other issues that might be pertinent to the police department and the community. I think the board rules are basically just clarifying that, because I think you felt like the board rules before were a little bit more focused on the complaints and where those recommendations were going. So I didn't want to give the misperception that the board rules are somehow expanding your authority. It's just going to be kind of clarifying and explaining what's actually in the city code going into your board rules. Does that make sense, or anybody have any questions on that?
That makes sense. I thank you for clarifying that. And I think we just wanted to also as well, define our role. You know, as we stated earlier, since when we started, you know, we started with the board rules and so forth. So we were more focused on police complaints initially, where now we understand it's always been there. It's just we wanted to put that in the forefront. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Anybody else have any comments on that? No. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Jurgens, for clearing that up for us. Well, we have a couple just, you know, some topics. I don't know if anybody else on the board would like to discuss any other topics. I know it's more open to the quarterly meeting, but is there any other comments or questions or anything that you guys would like to add to this quarterly meeting before we move on to the item number 11? Yes, Mr. Taylor.
I see as item B on the agenda for the addition of a youth member. There was some discussion around adding a youth member, and I guess I would ask Nora or Jeff, has there been any further discussion by the mayor or city council or city manager of them considering the addition of a youth member? And if so, what is that feeling or conversation about?
I guess I'll add that what I've heard, and Jeff, please add as well. No specific discussion, but general support and perhaps looking for more direction from the board as to what you would like to see. And then, of course, there is some, you know, process behind that about further amending, you know, the ordinance in your bylaws to reflect that. Jeff, do you have anything to add to?
No, again, I don't know anything more specific than that. I think if there was a sense out of this board that a youth member should be added, I think the council would clearly consider that, and I'd be happy to draft up the ordinance or anything else to make that happen. So I don't have anything else.
Then, Mr. Chairman, I would suggest that we add crafting language for at least conversation around adding a youth member to our next agenda as an agenda item, so that we could at least formalize our conversation around either the support of or the lack of support of a youth member being added to the board, and if necessary, the creation of language that would, I guess it would be part of both the ordinance and the board rules for the addition of that youth member, and parameters that they could be, if there are parameters that we would want to add to the addition of that youth member, and what their addition might mean for voting and for review of police complaints, or are they merely around as an educational function to observe how the board functions, or just what that is. So I think that an agenda item would be sufficient for us to have those conversations.
Yes, Serena.
Hi, I agree with Mr. Taylor. We've had this discussion. We all, as far as I could understand, we all think the addition of a youth member is a good idea. Some of the questions, would they be voting? Would they not be voting? Mr. Taylor had a very good conversation about what is their age? What's a youth member? Is it someone under 21? Is it someone 21 to 25? What would be their time of service? Because they would be moving in and out of high school, in and out of college, leaving the area. So I think all that kind of stuff, I would suggest that when we do start talking about this, it's a great item for a quarterly meeting, and but thinking about all these parameters, if we add another person to the board and what their voting capability is, their age, term of limit probably might only be a year, or so that it's a revolving thing. Again, going along with Mr. Gooseland, maybe it could be a member from all the different organizations and they take turns being representative. So it's an idea to add somebody to our agenda and possibly making it a youth member also. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. I will definitely add it to our agenda for our next board meeting. And then my hopes is that by that time we have our currently vacant position filled, because I think this vacant position, whoever it is, fills it, needs to be also involved in this conversation. I think it would be premature if we have any discussions without the current vacancy being filled. So not to say that I want to shelf this for further discussion, which I will put it on the next agenda. And again, this my hope is that that position it will be filled by our next board meeting. Okay. Any other additional comments, questions before we move on to discussions of future dates and topics? Hearing none. Nora, should we continue doing as we are? I'm assuming we still have to be virtual.
Yes, we are hybrid virtual right now. We can take up to, I think it's 20 people or so in the fishbowl, but it's still separated from chambers. But yes, mostly virtual for now. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if the board is okay with the next board meeting being, the next board meeting being for November, that myself and Nora discuss a date and time where the chambers are open for to host a meeting. Would that be okay? Yes, Serena.
Yeah, I think that's been working for us. So yes.
And if I may volunteer this, and I think this will come up if you don't mind, Chairman Vasquez.
Yes.
So going into the next year, boards and commissions are required to provide a schedule to the clerk's office, which we did last year, but we've kind of been moving around with these special meetings. It's preferred that we set a schedule for the year and stick with it for matters of transparency. And it seems like the first Thursday of the month seems to be working. So I will double check on that. But if that works for the group, I would propose the first Thursday in November, and then going forward, the first Thursday, December, and then for 2021 going forward. And I think Chairman Vasquez, you mentioned the 3:30 time period.
Yes. So is the board still okay with first Thursday of the month moving forward, and the time is 3:30 still okay?
And these would be for the regular meetings.
Correct. Mr. Taylor, did you have?
That is a change from the meetings that we had originally scheduled for the second Wednesday of every month. I have no problem with us changing that to the first Thursday if that's the position of the board. So I have no problem with that whatsoever.
Now, Nora, was the Thursday because that's what seems to be working right now as far as the chambers?
Right. So for as long as we have to remain in the semi-virtual state, and who knows how long that will be, the first Thursday seems to be a time when these resources are available.
Okay. Ms. Fish.
I don't have a problem with it, so I'm fine with the date and the time.
Dr. Black, is the times and dates okay?
I'd like to make a motion that we go with the first Thursday, 3:30 for our regular meeting from henceforth now and forevermore.
Do we need a motion for that, Nora?
No, in fact, I don't believe you can make a motion on that
Okay.
at this time. Is that correct, Jeff?
Okay, so no motion
But
is
thank
needed,
you.
Dr. Black.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Reverend Black.
thank you.
That's fine.
Mr. Bennett, that work for you still? Mr. Woodard?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so we will shoot for the first Thursday of the month for the board meetings.
Sounds good. I'll work on that. And if I can take one more liberty, Chairman Vasquez.
Yes, ma'am.
I'd just like to thank, as thank yous are going around, Amy Overton, who in our office has been assisting in scheduling these meetings and helping with the postings and all of that. I know a lot of you haven't met her, don't know her, but she's downstairs watching the door for us right now. So thank you, Amy. I know you're watching and appreciate all your hard work.
Yes, I double that, triple that. And these, Phil again, Amy, Nora, the whole board, thank you very much for getting us through these times. And you know, we'll be better on the other side. I'm sure we will. Yes, Serena.
I just want to add in, since we're thanking everybody. Yes, Amy is quite nice. But I also want to just put in here, we're in voting mode here, people. If you don't vote, you don't have an opinion. So I'm just encouraging. I'm working on election commission. Please, if you vote by mail, if you vote in person, if you do an absentee, whatever you do, please vote. Thank you.
Mr. Taylor.
Yes, I second what Serena just said. I just got done voting early at the Coliseum, and it was a great experience. But I did have a question for Nora or Jeff. The question is there a perspective, opinion of thought as to what the new year will bring with reference to public meetings, as to whether or not there will be a more open way of holding public meetings? What is the city's position on that? And because as we set our calendar for January and for 2021, I'd be interested in knowing what the perspective of us holding our meetings in person again, and is that something that we can anticipate at this point?
I think none of us have a crystal ball right now, and we've been trying very hard to follow the prescription of the governor's executive orders, and we'll continue to do so. Jeff, do you have anything to add?
No, just would say the city's taking it on basically a month by month basis. So, that we'll just have to evaluate that as it comes.
Dr. Black.
I'd just like to say, until the Illinois Department of Public Health, Dr. Ngozi Ezike, says it's safe to go back, I'm not coming back into the building. Our church is not coming back into the building until it's safe.
Well, thank you very much, everybody, for your comments. Is there anything else before we adjourn on time or right before time at 7? Hearing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Serena,
Seconded.
did you get that, Nora?
Yes.
Okay. Motion is
Do we
passed.
have to do a roll call?
Oh, yes, we do have to do a roll
Oh.
call. You are correct. So we do have to do a virtual roll call to adjourn. Ms. Fish,
Yes.
Dr. Black,
Yes.
Mr. Woodard,
Yes.
Mr. Taylor,
Yes.
Mr. Bennett.
Yes.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
And
Thank
I
you.
yes as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. You guys have a good evening.
You too.
Bye-bye.